Okay, the session is being recorded. So good morning or good afternoon to all of you, wherever you are. Happy Valentine's Day to you. Welcome to the lovely event that we've got here for Steps Towards ITIL4 Adoption. We promise that you're going to love this presentation more than those little heart-shaped candies. My name is JJ Stenitzer. I'm filling in for Mitchell Pouts today. Thank you, Mitch, for organizing this event. He wasn't able to attend today, so I'll fill in, try to do him justice. He's a great moderator. Let's have a look at our agenda for this afternoon. So first, I'm going to introduce our two panelists. Jeffrey Tiffertiller is a prolific author, and he is a purveyor of practical and insightful wisdom of all kinds, but especially service management. This is going to be a delight to have him today. If you are looking for Jeffrey, you can find him on LinkedIn. He's the only Jeffrey Tiffertiller. I looked. And you can also find him at servicemanagement.us. And we're also joined today by Deborah McDaniels. Deb is the Associate Director of IT Service Management at Rutgers University and has been practicing ITSM for over a decade. So Deb is here to share some insights from real experiences working on the journey to ITIL4 adoption over at Rutgers. There are going to be some survey results from the community group poll that was sent out just to get a feel for how people were doing with their ITIL4 adoption. And Jeffrey is going to speak to some of that and share some steps towards ITIL4 adoption, some real concrete things about stop thinking about adopting and getting in the car towards adoption. We'll talk a little bit about potential obstacles to ITIL4 adoption in your organization, and then some takeaways for what you can do today. At the end, we will do our Q&A, so we're going to hold questions until the end. If you have questions at any point during the presentation, please use the Q&A function down at the bottom on Zoom. You can also use the chat. We encourage you to use the chat to talk with other attendees. But in terms of things that we'll answer in the Q&A, please do use that Q&A function. That's where I'll be reading questions from at the end. We expect the presentation is going to take about 40 to 45 minutes, and we'll save 10 or 15 at the end for that Q&A. All the attendees here are going to be on mute during the webinar. So again, post questions in the Q&A. If you want to talk to our panelists, you can do a raise hand function at the end, and I'll try to unmute you just so you can speak. But I think that's about it. So I will let you sit back, enjoy the presentation. Before I hand it over, one more reminder, this is being recorded, and we'll share it within 5 business days up on the ITSM CG. Okay, without further ado, over to you, Jeffrey.
Thank you, JJ. You did Mitch proud, I'm sure. I'm sure when he listens, he'll be happy. My name's Jeffrey Tiffertiller, and if you ask at the end of this, am I really this energetic always? The answer is yes. And so apologies in advance, but I try to bring the energy. All right, so we talked about the introductions. Mitchell sent out a survey about ITIL4, and along this conversation, as well as a lot during the slides, I'll pitch it to Deb and see if how that meshes with her, whatever the topic is, with her experience at Rutgers. And I'm looking forward to being with you all today. So a little bit about me, I'll go back. So that bio was written by Mitch. So if you love it, thank Mitch. If you hate it, blame me. I've been in the service management, asset management world since '94. So these gray hairs are earned. And so I really enjoy the topic. I'm pretty passionate about this topic. And so we'll get started. So on the survey results, the question was, what percent of the IT organization you work for has taken ITIL4 training? And if you get rid of the ones at the bottom, which are a little bit noise, considering there's 35 responses, you see a decent sized bell curve with 1 to 25% being the main number. No training has been taken at 14.3%, which is basically 1 out of 7. So you have 5 out of 35 responses. 11% for 26 to 50, and over 50%, 11.4 as well. So you can see a decent sized bell curve there. This is the one that really interested me, this one, the next one. So if you've taken ITIL4, what do you find the most valuable? And so the practices, I think, is a great answer. And just understanding the service value system, service value chain, those are all very big paradigm shifts for all of us. So let me pause right here. Deb, do these match up with some of your experiences?
Yes, they do. A lot of people who come into our ITIL4 training have come from ITIL V3, which was very heavy, talking about what they referred to as processes back in ITIL V3. So definitely they're interested in the practices and how they have changed in ITIL4.
And on those, there's still a lot of ITIL4 people that call them processes, and it's okay. This is a journey, and it's just hard to bring people on that journey if we argue over, is it a practice or is it a process? So
Yes.
my job is, or my goal is to usually stay away from those conversations and try to stay to, understanding what's changed. So there's one change, or let me give two, the separation of, in terms of practices of release and deployment.
Yes.
That was interesting. And the other one is separating, well, let's stack them, service asset configuration into two,
Yes.
because, configuration management now looks very different than asset management.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are some of the ones. So I like talking about those changes more than, do we call it a process or a practice?
That's right.
All right. So Deb, since your organization's made this move, you see this big number that have made the move in part, some are considering, and then a big percentage, no plans at this time. It's a journey.
Mm-hmm. It really is. It really is. And I did not find this surprising at all from the survey results. A lot of people are in the process of moving or considering moving, to the ITIL4, and some have no plans because, for them, the ITIL V3 processes, how they define them, or some are using alternative frameworks besides ITIL, and they're happy with that. And it really is, and I think you're going to talk about this a little bit more as we go ahead, it really is about your organization and what your organizational needs are.
On that topic, and I don't want to spoil something coming, but this is a blanket statement. There is no one best answer for anything in terms of service management. And I dislike when we try to get to that point, because there isn't one best answer. So let's jump into 3 steps toward ITIL4 adoption for any and every university or organization. These are pretty high level. We'll talk a little deeper as we go. And as JJ mentioned, I'll save time at the end for us to have Q&A. I enjoy that. So moving to ITIL4 is difficult. I don't think anybody would tell you it's easy. The terminology's changed, and even how we look at service management is changing. So while ITIL V3 provided step-by-step instructions, ITIL4 is not so prescriptive. I think of imagery. So if you all bear with me on this illustration and imagery, think of ITIL V3 as a restaurant. It has a series of line cooks, each with a defined role and knowledge of how to execute it. Food is passed down the line to produce the desired results. So if you think about that service life cycle in V3, we had service strategy, service design, service transition, service operation, and you had to go through each one as you move down. Where ITIL4 is like the chef who, knowing what the final dish is going to look like in each of their dishes, must buy groceries, chop, prepare, and cook the food exactly as desired. And so we think of that like the service value chain in ITIL4. And so no two chefs would prepare the food order the same. I don't know about you all, if you all ever have these conversations in your family, but somebody will have grandma's recipe for cookies. Whoever makes them, they're not going to taste like grandma, because the same recipe is going to taste different. It's just going to be different than somebody else. And so this is kind of where we were going. So I appreciate Deb's, her experience, what they're going through at Rutgers, and for you all to be able to to relate to it in your university, but knowing that it's not going to be the same. It's a archetype of that journey. Deb, what are you thinking about that?
I think you're absolutely right. ITIL4 is really about understanding your organization, understanding what is valued in your organization in terms of service delivery and service support. So it's really important that you understand that about your organization. And I think where a lot of people got in trouble with ITIL v3 was, yes, it did have that prescriptive kind of model, but a lot of people tried to take that model and just lift it right out of ITIL v3 and apply it into their organization without thinking about, does this really apply for us, right? And so I think with ITIL4, it gives us an opportunity to be able to take good practices, best practices, marry them together and come away with a framework that actually works for our organization and our needs at the time that we can adopt and adapt as we move forward.
Great transition point. So note, as we mentioned, no two academic institutions are alike. I know of two in my home city, my home state, that are very different. And even though they look the same, you go on campus, pretty similar, they're not the same. And so each has a unique set of variables, including leadership and leadership goals and what's important. I know many of you all have been through transition of leadership and seeing how the new leader wants things totally different. Maybe subject matter expertise within your service management team. You may have a better change manager or incident manager, or maybe worse. And so a lot of that's going to define how you move to ITIL4, the speed especially. Stakeholder needs. I've been around some universities that have full research hospitals and some that are just a community college, and their needs are going to be very different. The tool sets, we mentioned the best practice, but even which tool you use may define how easy it is to go to ITIL4. Plus ITIL v3 process maturity. I don't want to overstate the obvious, but if your service management org isn't very mature, it's hard to take something that's in flight and maturing and now let's make a big change. And so these are just variables, and every organization is going to be different in those. And with the uniqueness of each university, there will be no one right way. And as Deb said, it's just what's right for your university at this time. Tomorrow, it may be different. And Deb, any thoughts on this? Because this summarized where you were.
Yeah, I think this slide is spot on in terms of what to think about as an organization as you're looking to either adopt ITIL4 or make that transition from ITIL v3 to ITIL4. Just a couple of points that I've found, in our journey is it's very important to make sure that you do have some defined processes before you start thinking about moving to value streams, because you are going to need to understand what's important to actually complete for those processes in order to deliver your support and your services. And so I would say that a lot of times people think that, we're moving to ITIL4 and ITIL v3 doesn't matter anymore, but going back and looking at some of the prescriptive information from those practices definitely will help you as you transition to ITIL4 and the service value system, as well as value streams.
And validate everything. It's just context for where we're going. And to that point, because what a change is still the same. It's still a change in state to a configuration item or a change in something. And so, it didn't invalidate that. It just gives it context. And so let's move on. So I have 3 steps, and these are all really high level, and we'll get to them hopefully in a little bit of depth. So 3 steps. Number 1, identify 3 of the ITIL4 guiding principles to adopt. There are 7. And so we'll talk about these in a little bit of detail. Focus on value. Have you noticed that those of us in the IT community, if we're very old, we have been through the stage of where IT did things for IT's benefit and there wasn't any any idea on how our product or service would be consumed. And so there's this topic of value. And, previous versions of ITIL, ITIL 1, 2, we talked about value creation. Now we're talking about co-creation. So using a food analogy, if I walk up to a sandwich shop and I say, I want the number 8, but I want no pickles or onions, I'm co-creating with them because value to me means no pickles or onions. And so we have to engage with our stakeholders on what value means. And this kind of gets into what's best for your university at this time. Because if we been around very long, we know that that concept of value, it changes often. And it changes dramatically on what's important to your organization. Start where you are. I know this seems like an old time concept, but when I used to go to a shopping mall or amusement park, I would be walking around and I'd say, I want to go to find some food. I would go to those big maps with the star and it said, you are here. And that's the only way I would know how to get to where the food is. If we know that our food, if that's focus on value, that's where our value is, we have to know where our starting point is. Third, progress iteratively with feedback. This is a part where ITIL4 incorporated the agile and other methodologies to be more iterative. Being agile, big A agile, is a very popular topic right now. And on this, we're just talking about being little a agile, being nimble, so that when you go in a direction, you can now alter and go in a different direction if things move differently. I don't know if any of you all were in this spot, but I know of some organizations that 3 years ago, about this time, were planning these big waterfall projects for November, December of 2020. They never made that because we never got that far because of the pandemic. Collaborate and promote visibly. That's kind of self-explanatory. That and think and work holistically. Let's get out of our silos. Let's do things across the organization. Keep it simple and practical. Many in IT, we're known for overbuilding things, right? And last, optimize and automate. It doesn't say optimize, then automate. It says and. And so a lot of people want to make that and then. And sometimes they're separate, sometimes they're not. Let me kick it over to Deb and see if there's which of these are really important to Rutgers.
Yeah, the first, of course, is focusing on value, because when you focus on value, that's when you really have the conversations across the organization to understand what the challenges are and how to address them as you're looking at defining your practices, defining your service value chains. Starting where you are is really important. A lot of times people want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, that proverbial statement. And sometimes what you have is really good. And you want to incorporate the good from what you have and not just start from scratch. So you want to be able to start from where you are. And I love all 7 of these, but I think I have a tie between progressing iteratively with feedback, because that's important so that you don't do a whole lot of work and get way to the end and realize if you had just asked some questions and gotten some feedback earlier in the beginning, you could have saved yourself a lot of trouble with a lot of the work that you were doing. And the other one that ties for me with that one is keep it simple and practical. We have a tendency sometimes to overthink things. And when we're overthinking things, we make the work much more complex than it needs to be.
Now, my being snarky, we in IT make things more complex. No, that can't be. So the other thing about, let me get into, so here's a sample. Understand what value means to stakeholders. We talked about that. Start where you are. And Deb mentioned, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I know some people who they want to see themselves either more mature, and some people are just skeptics, right? They see themselves worse than they really are. And so understanding really where you are is a difficult thing. I use this analogy often. Hopefully you all will find it as humorous as I do, but I have two teenagers, a girl and a boy. Most teenage girls, when they see themselves in the mirror, they see themselves worse than they really are. When a boy does, they see themselves better than they are. They think they're all muscular. They have like 3 facial hairs and they think that that's a full beard. And just understanding that exact start where you are picture is important, and then progress iteratively. So this is just a sample that you can do to just start adopting for your organization. So focus on value, figure out your starting point, and then how do you progress iteratively? That feedback part is important because it means that you are talking to the people that are telling you what value is. And so that you are making that connection.
Yep.
So mine's similar to Deb's there. So step number 2, identify 2 to 3 service value streams. It looked like most of the people on that survey had gone through ITIL4. We'll talk about it at a high level. So this is the service value chain inside of ITIL4. And we'll talk about this. Demand is something you know. So think of like a service catalog item. We go through, engage, obtain and build, design and transition, deliver and support into value. And then you see the improve on the bottom and plan at the top. Plan is like architecture, things of that nature, and improve, I think is pretty self-explanatory. So first step, start with something your organization agrees is value. Whatever that is, start, because it's going to be different. It must be something that you know what it is and how to handle. So how do we handle this? Predefined way, what's easy for us to understand. You probably already have many value streams, you're just not calling them such. And we'll look at a definition, not really, it's my definition, it's not really the ITIL one, but I think mine is one that everybody understands, and hopefully it makes sense to you. We'll look at a definition and we'll look at a sample value stream. So value streams cross multiple processes or practices. We talked about that, V3 or ITIL4, and are used to co-create value in the most efficient way possible. And so if you think about how we looked at things in V3, everything had to go step by step by step. And ITIL4 saying, let's try to find the most efficient way. Let's find that efficient path to value. Because if we look at it, our stakeholders, those people who are consuming our services, they really don't care about our processes and practices. They just want their stuff as efficiently as possible, as quick, as cheap as possible. So we'll look at an example, ordering a new laptop. Same diagram. You order it through self-service. There's your demand. You check with the user to verify the specs. So do you really need 24 gig RAM? Do you really need an SSD? Do you really, all that sort of thing? You verify your approved specs, because most organizations have approved so that you don't get into all the one-offs. You would pull it from your inventory on your obtain or build. And that's the same spot that, oh, we don't have one of these, or we need more memory. You would order at that spot. You'd configure it in the design and transition, update asset records, solicit feedback. The deliver and support is where we used to be in the last half of service transition and now in all of service operations within ITIL V3. The user receives the laptop. Hopefully they get value. We add the improvement feedback loop, and that's pretty much our nice, easy value stream. Deb, does that match how you all are doing it?
Yeah, I believe so. That's a great example. I think this is a very clear example. And I will say, Jeffrey, it's one of the best, most clear examples I've seen of a value stream. So thank you.
Thank you. And so when we look at this, hopefully this resonates with you all that have a lot of V3 experience. Notice how we transverse many practices. So that demand has our service catalog and our service request. We also have asset management. We may have business relationship management. We have many of those. And all we're saying is we don't have to go step by step by step on each one. We want, for the user's point of view, to make it as seamless as possible. The user doesn't care about our practices. They just want the value. They just want the laptop as soon as possible. And this is a simple example, but there are many more. And so if you all have some in your organization, type them in the chat and we'll talk about them at the end. But there's several others that are obvious just to be thinking about in terms of how do you explain a service value stream to your organization? All right. So my third step is focus on iterative improvement. The topic shows up as a practice. It shows up as a guiding principle. You remember the progress iteratively with feedback, that's improvement. Part of the service value system, part of the service value chain. It's important. It's important in ITIL4 is us understanding improvement. But I think that's how we would say that's our daily lives anyway. We have to be improving. We have to be moving forward in the right direction. Whatever that right direction is, we have to find it. So consider how much your institutions have changed and evolved over the last 3 years during the pandemic. We do things differently now. Let me ask Deb, at least I'm making the universities I'm familiar with are doing things much differently now than they were. Is Rutgers?
In many cases, yes, absolutely. We've had to adjust and adopt. Yes.
Oh yeah. I was just
online
thinking,
classes.
oh yes, online, and how do we handle? I'm an adjunct professor at a university that all I teach is one class, 2 sections during the summer. I don't even have a badge to get into university. Like I have no credentials, yet I teach a couple of classes. I have an email address and a way to log into Canvas. That's it. And that is something that's been an output of this new world we live in. And it's interesting because people are all over the world listening to me talk on a Monday and Thursday evening in the summer. So improvement is based upon alignment with stakeholders. And this is a rhetorical question, but I hope that you all will consider it. Is it really improvement if we get better in an area that our stakeholders really don't care about? Is that really improvement? And we have to be thinking about that because improvement comes with that alignment. I use this example a lot. Hopefully it resonates with you. If you leave New York City heading to Europe and you're off by just 1 degree, you remember those old, whatever they are in math that show 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees. 1 degree is not very much, but you're off 1 degree. You're going to miss your mark wherever you're headed to in Europe by 92 feet for every mile you travel. Now, think about that. So that's a lot of miles. You're going to miss your destination, just 1 degree, miss it by a lot of yards, maybe even a mile, depending on how many degrees you're off. So now we multiply that by the number of degrees we've experienced in the last 3 years. I've experienced a lot of change in how much I was off and have to realign in my life. I'm sure everyone else has as well. So 4 obstacles to ITIL4 adoption. So on this, let me ask Deb, does this resonate with Rutgers?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our institution is constantly changing and evolving. And as such, so are the services that we offer, how we offer them, how we deliver them, how we support them. So it's important for us to constantly get that feedback from stakeholders, the people who are using our services, so that we can understand how to better improve those services. And all of that comes from that focus on iterative improvement.
I think even the services or how they're delivered has changed over the last 3 years. And
Absolutely.
it'll change over the next 3. And
Absolutely.
we have to have that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So 4 obstacles to ITIL4 adoption, whether it's in terminology, processes versus practice, different metrics, because if we're doing things different, we have to measure differently.
Mm-hmm.
The move to service value systems, we'll need to bring people along with for the change. Have you ever been in this rhetorical to everyone, Deb, feel free to speak up, but have you all ever been in an organization where change was done to the organization, not with the organization? And it's how do we bring the organization with us on this change?
Mm-hmm.
So leadership support. We all know this is important, whether it's getting resources or whatever it is, make sure we have funding, but it may be the most important critical success factor. And we must give our leaders a reason to invest the needed resources. So many IT organizations were designed based upon the V3 life cycle, especially when it comes to operations, because we wanted to separate out in that's those people, we're the architects, we're the designers, we're doing things differently. And so like DevOps and other frameworks, ITIL4 requires integrating all parts of the value stream into one. If you think back to the service value chain, we have plan up at the top and improve at the bottom. A lot of that, so that's all into one plan. If you think about service strategy, service design of V3 and improve, sure looks like continual improvement from ITIL V3. So most ITSM tools are built on the V3 lifecycle, and so you have to adjust how you think about co-creating value. And my example on this is if I pulled out a V3 service operations book from the years go by, which I have one right off screen, and I looked at the steps to resolve an incident. Most tools are going to have those almost exactly the same as the ITIL V3 book. So if our tools are set up in a service lifecycle manner, we have to rethink through our tooling, how do we do value streams? And there are many ways to do it, but I just want to leave you with that thought.
Mm-hmm.
Deb, is there another obstacle that maybe I didn't capture or that you want to talk about that's one of these 4?
Really, the one about the ITIL V3 service lifecycle really hits home for me, especially when you're talking about the tools. And as you said, they're defining those process workflows on ITIL V3, and we're talking about ITIL4 and the value streams. So for our organization, to kind of overcome that obstacle, we kind of use education to define value streams. We kind of use the ITIL4 education to help us with that. Slides like what you showed earlier that kind of talked the concepts of the value streams. And then when we do our training around the actual processes themselves, how the things work inside of the tool, we use that process training to define those workflows in the tool. And as you mentioned, that's going to rely very heavily on ITIL V3. So it's kind of like, you're ended up using both as you're transitioning to ITIL4. So it's really important, as I mentioned earlier, to just make sure that you have your processes defined, and it makes that transition to ITIL4, that move to value streams much easier for the organization. And another thing you have here about leadership support, I found that that's very critical. I've headed up service management programs a couple of places prior to coming to Rutgers University. And I will say leadership support is the most critical success factor for a program of this size. You're talking a lot about organizational change management, changing the hearts and the minds of people. And if you don't have that strong leadership support, them walking the walk and talking the talk as you do, and as well as providing the support that you need for resources and investments in order to make it happen, it will not happen. It will not be successful. So that I've found to be critically important in my experiences.
I think you're spot on. And on the tool part, I think we will always have ITIL v3 as a part of the tool until the tool makers figure out how to do value streams. Until they,
Correct.
many of them are years, possibly decades away. I don't mean to offend anyone, but they're a long way away. And so we will always have a foot into both boats, trying to bridge and how do we apply the best parts of ITIL4, knowing that we're going to have other parts that are still going to be locked onto v3.
Yep.
So what can you do today as we get close to wrapping up? You can begin socializing the benefits. As we mentioned earlier, do not get bogged down in the terminology arguments. Is it a process? Is it a practice? All that sort of thing, but just talk about the benefits. Refocus on value and what that means to stakeholders. We refocus, and the reason I use the word refocus is many times we had it focused, laser focus on what value was. Then we got bogged down with all the stuff going on, whether it's today or tomorrow, and we lose sight of what's value. So we have to go talk to those stakeholders, say, hey, help me understand what value means to you. Begin thinking about how to measure value streams. If you think about my ordering a laptop, in a v3 mindset, each process would have their own metrics. Service catalog would have its metrics. Is the item, is the laptop correct on the service catalog? Service request would say, hey, do we have how was the request fulfilled? Asset management would say, how's our stock? But what we're trying to say is, the user doesn't care. We need to put those through some kind of seamless metric. And with the focus on improvement aligned to value, and this alignment must constantly be assessed and addressed. I don't know about any of you all's personal relationships. I know mine. I have to always be addressing that alignment because it's easy for two people to get out of line. Get out of alignment. And if it's easy for two people, can you imagine how hard it is for you and your stakeholders to get out of that alignment? So we always must be assessing and addressing it. So that's all I had. I'll kick it over to Deb to close us up on these topics.
Sure. When you're starting out, I definitely the principle of starting where you are, make sure you have that executive buy-in. I cannot stress that enough. You want to make sure that if you're responsible for leading your organization and taking your organization on this journey of adopting and adapting to the principles of ITIL, the guiding principles of ITIL, that you have that buy-in from your executive team. It's also important when we're talking about continual improvement. You really don't want to get bogged down in the minutia or the details of where you want to be. You want to kind of define it at a high level because it's going to change. I hate to say that, but it's going to change. So you want to define it at a high level and use it to provide guideposts along the way, right? It's a checkpoint for you, right? You can always go back when you're progressing iteratively with feedback. When you're reassessing everything, you can always go back and make sure that you're checking and going and heading in the right direction. And so it's really important to regularly assess what you have defined as the end in mind to make sure you're staying on track, and always keep checking in with your stakeholders, check in with your leadership, check in with the users of the systems, making sure that you are still focusing on value, still focusing on that value co-creation and staying on track towards the goals that you have defined for yourself. And the last thing that I would say, what can you do when you're starting today is just don't be afraid to adopt and adjust along the way, because as Jeffrey has mentioned, And as I'm mentioning, your current organizational needs are going to change. So you want to keep that small a agile mindset. You want to keep that small a agile mindset and just continually progress iteratively with feedback.
Great way for us to end it. And I saw JJ pop back in. So here's for Q&A, and Mitch wanted to make sure that I had this on the slide. If you see down there at the bottom, please take the survey using the link provided at the end. Mitch wanted to make sure that we we shouted that out. All right, JJ, you're up.
Thanks. We've got a number of questions in the queue, so we're going to take the rest of our available time to get to as many of those as we can. One question asked during the presentation was, will the slides be shared out at the end? And yes, those are going to be emailed out to all the attendees, so stay put and you'll get those soon. I'm going to read the questions from the Q&A. The first one that I've got is from Teresa. And the question is, as a service management or service manager in leadership who's part of a program to reinvest and reinvigorate our ITIL service management practices in our division, I'm creating a toolkit for our service managers to use to get our services more aligned and at the same maturity level. What would be one or two things that you would recommend that I include in that toolkit?
I would first ask, I would make sure I understood, and Deb, pipe in at the end and let me in if you think it's something different. I would say number one, make sure those tools align with what your stakeholders need, just so that the goalposts, to use a football analogy, the goalposts are the same. But on that, so that may be right, that toolkit may include regular check-ins. It may include metrics to measure what that value is, things of that nature. But second of all, I would also look at from a value stream point of view, how do we efficiently get there? And so could I say policy documentation, process documentation, all that, but I'd rather refocus on what the goal is, because that may change, for example, how you do your change advisory board stuff. It may change a lot of your things. So I would be thinking of value and then having your metrics aligned to that, which I don't know if answers the question, but Deb, what are your thoughts?
I think that's very, very key to understand what is being measured, because you can't improve what you can't measure. So that's really important. I know you mentioned this in passing, but I would say if your organization is trying to reinvest and reinvigorate your ITIL processes, it's going to be important that you do include what your policies are around those practices, those procedures, those processes that you're using. Sorry, process and procedure is different. There's processes and practices that you're using. You want to make sure you have that. And if you have guidelines for your organization, for those practice areas, make sure you include those guidelines and make sure they're clear and that people understand them. I think that is a level set, just level setting with everyone as part of the toolkit. And then of course, providing great examples.
Awesome. Thanks very much for that. And I'm going to take a question from David here. David wrote, how do you document all of your different value streams? Where are they stored? Did you create a library or knowledge base and grant access to IT staff? Are they being used? This sounds like it might be a question for Deb.
Yeah, so for us, that's a work in progress. And what we're really working on is creating that library as in the form of knowledge articles, those types of things. We keep them in a knowledge base that all of our IT staff have access to. Sometimes the work streams or the value streams may be restricted, but that restriction is just based on who's logged into the system at the time and what they're able to see. But that definitely is the case. You want to have a central repository for it if you can. Jeffrey, I don't know your thoughts on that.
In the interest of time, I'll let that be the answer. I think you have to have a central repository and your users don't really care what they are. It's just for us on how do we execute what value in the form of products and services.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that question reminds me of the ITIL principle to collaborate and promote visibility. It's very important to do for your critical value streams.
Yes.
Got a question here from Nick. He asks, if your organization has never implemented any version of ITIL, how would you start learning about it? Does it make sense to start with the leadership team?
I think the only reason you'd go with the leadership team first is to make sure you have resources. But I would start with the guiding principles. I would start having conversations with leaders and even leaders of your stakeholders, say, what is it we're trying to accomplish? Because you may have somebody in risk management that says, you must do change or you must do incident because we've had too many outages. I would, because you're going to have a finite amount of resources. You're going to have to figure out, where do I put them? And you only know that by talking to your leadership and your stakeholders.
100% agree.
Great. I've got some related questions from Serene. Serene asked, can you talk about training across the organization? Are you working with a vendor or doing it internally? Can you talk about the benefits of budgeting for all IT staff to be trained up?
Serene, that's a loaded question. It depends on your organization and what your organization's resources are in terms of being able to support. At Rutgers University, we have, as part of our service management office, we do offer that training and education, but we have an entire certification program that we work through to make sure we have trainers within our organization that can deliver it so that we're not always relying 100% on a vendor to provide it. But again, that was around costing and cost modeling and understanding what our organization could support in terms of resources in order to do it. And so again, that has to be something. I'm glad to take it offline and talk to you about it. But certainly it is going to depend on your organization, and there are several ways you could go about doing that.
And I'm one that likes the formal training. I was an ITIL V3 expert in 2014, and current and take a lot of classes. But I would just say that not every, you probably want to separate people into personas and understand what do they need. Some people may need some slimmed down version of ITIL4 that you could give in a lunch and learn to your network administrator, so to speak. Or your SMEs, you may want to take more advanced classes. So I would look more at how do you break those into personas and who needs what level, and then work backwards. But Deb's right that doing it internally does reduce cost and it helps you control things. It just depends on the organization in my mind.
Okay.
I've got a couple questions that are Deb questions queued up. The next one is from Todd. Todd writes, can you provide an example of how ITIL4 was implemented at Rutgers? What was one of the early projects and why was it chosen?
We started by defining our processes early on, but the key process for us, or the key practice area for us, was incident management. Everybody does incident management. You have help desks that are going to be doing incident management. Everybody's going to report something that's broken that needs to be fixed. So that was the practice that we started with first, because that's the one that's going to be most universal across the organization.
Great. Another one for you, Deb. Can you provide an example, or excuse me, that's the one we just did. The next one was when you were implementing ITIL programs that you mentioned, did you end up having to recommend new staffing positions or reorganize staff?
The answer is yes. In order to support our IT service management program, we definitely have included some analyst positions within our organization, and folks within that group are specialists in particular practice areas of ITIL.
And even on that note, if I can pile in, Deb, I know it's a Deb question, but even with things like asset management may have changed. And when you go back through that, maybe you have needs for specific skill sets. I only pick asset because every organization, whether it's university or publicly traded one, spends a lot on physical and software, hardware and software assets.
And that's our next big project in case anyone is interested. Asset management, configuration management, we're working at that and getting that organized for Rutgers University.
Great. We still got questions coming in, so I'll try to take us right up until the end of our time. The next one I've got comes from Jim. Jim asks, when working to create value streams, how do you rank the relative merits of competing value streams?
I would always focus on value.
Mm-hmm.
I would focus on which one brings the most value to the organization. And we all deal with users who think they're more important than others and all that stuff. But I would go with what's valuable to your organization, not just to you, and things of that nature. Deb?
Spot on with that. Focusing on value and choosing the value streams that bring the most value. Yep.
Great. Question from Terry. Terry writes, does ITIL4 include a catalog of services? This is kind of a terminology question.
I'll take that one. And I'll tell you why. Is I just went through some ITIL training on this. There's some ITIL classes coming out on this. So they have the self-service catalog, which sets as a subset of the service catalog. Did that make sense? So you have the catalog of services that your organization, then you have the self-service catalog that's a subset of that, which looks like Amazon or whatever, that you order a laptop, order a password reset or whatever.
And Terry, I'm not quite sure if I understand your question. So I'm not at liberty to answer any further than what Jeffrey offered.
Yeah, Terry, if you want me to unmute you, do a raise hand. I think this question, the reason I say it might be about terminology is, you know, ITIL has a prescription for how to, or it has guidance now in ITIL4 about how to manage the practice of having a service catalog, but it doesn't tell you what the services are. The services belong to your organization.
Right. And that's really where I thought that question was coming from. But
yeah. Okay, Terry, you're off mute.
Yep, it was just related to the creation of a service catalog under ITIL2 and ITIL3. It was always a challenge to kind of list what is it that we do. And now we could list those items, you know, step by step or item by item. But with this whole idea of service value, does that change what you list in your catalog so that it is a little bit of a different animal that you're offering to people?
I don't think so. You still need that catalog of services and service offerings. Jeffrey, correct me if I'm, you know, if you have a different viewpoint, but it doesn't change that need for the definition of your services and your actionable service catalog.
And your self-service, what always bogs people down is those names kind of sound the same, your self-service catalog and your service catalog. And JJ and I were talking about this last week, is a lot of organizations have like 100 services, and they're really not. They're just a much smaller number, and then they roll up into one. Because and a lot of it, some of it has to do with tooling. And there's a certain tool set out there that says, hey, you can flip the switch and it'll map your services for you. It really doesn't. That's really more of an art than a science. And all I would say, Terry, is what's on your self-service catalog are what the user sees. What your definition of services that you provide, they never really see those.
Right. And also, Terry, I'd like to point out that EDUCAUSE does have a model that you can use to get started. It isn't a lift and shift kind of thing, so to speak, but it is a good model. And there are several papers that have been white papers that are available through EDUCAUSE that can help you with that service modeling concept and the discussion around it.
Great, thank you very much.
If we had more time, Terry, I would tell you funny stories of where companies have done this poorly. There's a company in the Northeast that had 1,000, 2,000 on their self-service catalog. There's no way for a user to get through that. Can you imagine scrolling through like, where's that laptop? And anyway, JJ, what do we have next in the interest of time?
We just got 3 minutes left, so this is going to maybe be the last question. Maybe we'll get 2 more. So David has had his hand up for a minute. So David, can I take you off mute?
Sure. It's probably a longer question than we have time for, but I don't know, our audience that's out there. I'm an ITIL3 expert and an ITIL4 managing professional, and I'm completely lost with ITIL4. They blew it out of the water. I understand providing value and having this entire model of in the center of it, value chains. Okay, that's great. What happened to incident management and change management and all of your practices that are now someone who just comes into ITIL4 and they look at that model, they have no idea that you need to perform change management and you need to perform incident management and event management. And it bothers me that I went through all of that and now I'm struggling to find concept in this new model. And I don't know if that's a question, but it's just.
I gotcha. I know where you, because your frustration is common because it's one of those that it's not overtly mentioned. When I looked at the service value chain, it says design and transition, and it says deliver and support. Your incident management's there and deliver and support. It's just they don't have any diagrams that say, here's where this is, here's where this is, and how do we get there? Does that make sense? Deb, I welcome your feedback on this, but I understand the frustration.
Thank you.
Jeffrey, you were spot on with that. I mean, there's some frustration and some confusion. And as you said, it's a tough conversation for us to have with a couple of minutes left, but certainly I'm open and willing to have additional discussion with you around it. And I'm sure Jeffrey would, be willing to help you with that as well.
Yes. And I will tell you, I catch a lot of these conversations, David, because a lot of the ITIL authors are people I know really well. And I was a co-author on one of the books that's coming out later this month, the asset book. And so I'm at that cross point where I hear people's feedback and I'm trying to hear the why on the other side. But the part where I won't say they missed. The part that I think people would like clarity is help us match where the practices go in these diagrams in the service value system, service value chain.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you again, both Jeffrey and Deb, for presenting today and taking these questions. This is going to conclude our webinar as we're at the top of the hour. So just reminders for everybody, the recording of the event will be emailed out within 5 business days, and we'll include with that a transcript that with the live transcription from Zoom. And with that said, we're always interested in your feedback about this event and upcoming events, so please do respond to that exit survey that you'll see when the event ends. And if you have any ideas about upcoming events or events that you'd like to see, please contact our event coordinator, Mitchell Pouts, and we'll share out his contact information as well. And with that, we'll let you go. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending, and have a good Valentine's Day.
Thank you, everyone. Happy Valentine's Day. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.